In just 43 seconds of devastating silence, 2 careers crumbled. Pam Bondi didn't speak. Kash Patel couldn't move. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse held up a single classified document. Cameras zoomed on their pale faces. What did this Rhode Island senator reveal that made Trump's most trusted allies freeze like statues in a Senate hearing room? March 18, 2025, 2:47 p.m. The Hart Senate Office Building's room, 2116, buzzed with an electric tension that veteran reporters hadn't felt since Watergate. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse walked in, carrying a manila folder marked "Classified, Eyes Only," in bold red letters. His silver hair caught the harsh television lights as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. Across the witness table sat Pam Bondi, Trump's Attorney General nominee, her blonde hair perfectly styled, American flag pin gleaming on her navy blazer. Beside her, Kash Patel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his FBI director badge catching the light as his dark eyes darted between the cameras and the senator's folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitehouse began, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone who'd spent decades unraveling political conspiracies. "Today we discuss integrity in our justice system." Bondi smiled confidently, her media training evident as she leaned into her microphone. Patel straightened his tie, his prosecutor instincts sharpening for what he assumed would be routine political theater. Neither suspected that Whitehouse had spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing intercepted communications that would destroy them both. The hearing started routinely. Questions about qualifications, judicial philosophy, commitment to constitutional principles. Bondi delivered polished answers about her record as Florida's Attorney General. Patel spoke confidently about his vision for the FBI. Their legal teams, seated behind them in matching dark suits, exchanged satisfied glances. Everything proceeded exactly as their confirmation strategy had planned. The Republican senators lobbed softball questions. Democratic senators pressed on policy differences, but nothing explosive. The cameras captured what looked like a standard Washington confirmation dance. At exactly 3:23 p.m., Senator Whitehouse opened his classified folder. "Ms. Bondi, Mr. Patel," he said quietly, his tone shifting from senatorial courtesy to prosecutorial precision. "Are you familiar with something called Scheme 35? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Bondi's confident smile flickered for just a microsecond. Patel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Their legal teams leaned forward, suddenly alert. The press gallery fell silent, sensing blood in the water. Senator Bondi responded smoothly. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Her media training kicked in perfectly. Acknowledge the question, provide no information, deflect if possible. Patel nodded in agreement, his FBI experience guiding him to say nothing that could be twisted later. "Neither am I, Senator," he added, his voice steady and professional. Their responses seemed reasonable, cautious, appropriate for nominees facing hostile questioning. What they didn't know was that Whitehouse had recordings of them both discussing Scheme 35 in detail. Whitehouse pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is a transcript of a phone call between you, Miss Bondi, and you, Mr. Patel, on January 15, 2025, at 11:47 p.m. He adjusted his glasses and began reading in his measured Rhode Island accent. "Bondi, you said, and I quote, 'Scheme 35 gives us everything we need to clean house at DOJ. Kash handles FBI. I handle the prosecutorial side, and we make sure only Trump loyalists remain in key positions.'" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bondi's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Mr. Patel," Whitehouse continued without missing a beat, "your response was perfect. My contacts in the Bureau have already identified the resistance. Scheme 35 lets us remove them with bureaucratic cover. They'll never see it coming." Patel's hands gripped the witness table, his knuckles turning white. The carefully orchestrated confirmation hearing had just become a criminal investigation broadcast live on C-SPAN. Their legal teams frantically shuffled papers, looking for talking points that could address this nuclear bomb of evidence. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. The cameras captured every bead of sweat on their foreheads, every nervous swallow, every desperate glance between them. At 28 seconds, Bondi attempted to speak. "Senator, I would need to review," but Whitehouse held up his hand. I'm not finished." His voice carried the authority of a man who'd spent his career prosecuting corruption. The silence resumed. 35 seconds, 40 seconds, at exactly 43 seconds, both careers effectively ended, as Whitehouse revealed his final piece of evidence. "This," he said, holding up a USB drive, "contains 107 audio recordings, 43 encrypted text message chains, and detailed organizational charts, showing exactly how you plan to weaponize the Department of Justice for partisan political purposes." The USB drive seemed to glow under the television lights, a tiny plastic artifact that contained enough evidence to trigger the biggest political scandal since Watergate. Every conversation about removing career prosecutors, installing political loyalists, and using federal law enforcement to target Trump's enemies. Bondi's carefully constructed composure completely shattered. Her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass, missing it twice before finally grasping it. The blonde hair that had been perfectly styled now looked disheveled as nervous sweat broke through her makeup. "Senator," she stammered, "these allegations are completely—" But her voice cracked, betraying the panic she was desperately trying to hide. Her legal team was frantically texting, probably advising immediate withdrawal from the nomination process. Patel, the former federal prosecutor who'd built his career on aggressive questioning, found himself speechless for the first time in his professional life. His dark eyes darted between the cameras, the senators, and the USB drive that contained his destruction. The FBI badge on his chest, once a symbol of his authority, now felt like a weight dragging him down. His breathing became shallow and rapid, visible to anyone watching the live feed. The man who'd interrogated countless suspects was experiencing what it felt like to be completely, utterly caught. "The recordings," Whitehouse continued methodically, "detail your plan to fire 47 career DOJ employees, replace them with Trump loyalists, and redirect federal investigations away from Trump associates and toward his political enemies." Each number hit like a physical blow. 847 families destroyed. 847 careers ended. 847 public servants removed, not for performance, but for political independence. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its cynical ambition. Bondi attempted damage control. "Senator, even if such conversations occurred, discussing personnel changes is standard transition planning," but Whitehouse cut her off with surgical precision. "Bondi, on January 22nd, you specifically discussed using the Espionage Act to prosecute journalists who reported unfavorably on Trump. That's not personnel planning. That's authoritarian abuse of power." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Using espionage laws against American journalists crossed every red line in democratic governance. The social media explosion was immediate and volcanic. Scheme 35 began trending within minutes, quickly followed by DOJ Gate and Trump coup plot. Twitter erupted with clips of their shocked faces, their trembling hands, their complete inability to respond to Whitehouse's evidence. Cable news networks broke into regular programming with breaking news: Trump nominees caught in DOJ HIJACK plot banners. The political world stopped to watch two careers disintegrate in real time. Patel made a final desperate attempt at defense. "Senator, I've dedicated my career to law enforcement integrity." But Whitehouse wasn't finished destroying them. "Ms. Patel, you also discussed creating a special unit within the FBI, specifically tasked with investigating Trump's political opponents, including sitting Democratic senators and governors. You called it Operation Payback." The name alone revealed the naked political motivation. Not justice, not law enforcement, but vengeance dressed up in federal authority. Republican senators who'd been preparing to support both nominations began distancing themselves in real time. Senator Lindsey Graham, normally a Trump loyalist, was seen shaking his head and writing furious notes. Senator Susan Collins looked physically ill, her face pale as she processed the implications. Even the most partisan Republicans understood that supporting nominees caught planning to weaponize the Justice Department would be political suicide. The hearing room's atmosphere grew toxic with shame and embarrassment. Bondi's legal team was packing their briefcases, clearly advising immediate withdrawal. Patel's advisors whispered frantically in his ear, probably explaining that his FBI career was over, whether he got confirmed or not. The marble walls of the Hart Building had witnessed many political destructions, but rarely so complete, so public, so devastating to watch. Whitehouse delivered the final blow with the precision of a master prosecutor. Both of you took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. These recordings prove you became domestic enemies of the constitutional order you swore to protect. The words echoed in the chamber with the finality of a judge's gavel. 2 careers, 2 reputations, 2 decades of public service, all destroyed by their own words preserved on digital recordings. The immediate aftermath was swift and merciless. Within 30 minutes of the hearing's conclusion, both Bondi and Patel withdrew their nominations via hastily written letters, citing personal reasons and desire to avoid political circus. The letters fooled no one. Everyone understood they'd been caught red-handed, planning to transform America's justice system into Trump's personal weapon of political revenge. By evening, the Justice Department announced a criminal investigation into the Scheme 35 conspiracy. The FBI, the same agency Patel had hoped to lead, would now investigate him for potential seditious conspiracy charges. The irony was as thick as it was devastating. The man who'd wanted to weaponize federal law enforcement now faced its full investigative power turned against him for his attempted crimes. Bondi's law license came under immediate review by the Florida Bar Association. Legal experts across the political spectrum agreed that planning to abuse prosecutorial power for political purposes violated every ethical standard of the legal profession. Her carefully built career as a tough-on-crime prosecutor crumbled as evidence emerged of her willingness to ignore crime when committed by political allies. The Trump campaign initially tried damage control, claiming both nominees were victims of deep state persecution. But the recordings were too clear, too damning, too obviously authentic. Within 48 hours, Trump threw both under the bus, claiming he barely knew them and had relied on bad advice in making the nominations. The man they'd planned to serve abandoned them the moment they became political liabilities. Congressional investigations began immediately. The House Judiciary Committee announced hearings into the full scope of Scheme 35. The Senate Intelligence Committee opened a parallel investigation into potential foreign involvement in the plot. Government watchdog groups filed ethics complaints. Professional associations began disciplinary proceedings. The legal and political machinery of accountability ground into motion with inexorable force. Perhaps most damaging was the release of additional recordings showing both nominees discussing specific targets for political prosecution: Democratic governors, journalists who'd criticized Trump, even some moderate Republicans who'd shown insufficient loyalty, all marked for investigation by a weaponized DOJ. The enemies list was extensive, detailed, and terrifyingly reminiscent of Nixon's darkest impulses. Bondi retreated to her Florida mansion, reportedly devastated, according to friends who spoke anonymously to reporters. The woman who'd built her career on tough prosecutorial rhetoric now faced potential prosecution herself. Her political consulting firm lost every client within a week. Speaking engagements were canceled. Book deals evaporated. The complete social and professional ostracism was swift and total. Patel faced an even grimmer fate. Current FBI agents, learning of his plan to purge their ranks, began leaking additional evidence of his unfitness for leadership. Text messages showed him planning to remove agents based on their political donations rather than their performance. Internal FBI documents revealed his intention to redirect counterintelligence resources away from foreign threats toward domestic political surveillance. The 43 seconds of silence during Whitehouse's questioning became a viral sensation, viewed over 50 million times across social media platforms. Commentators analyzed every facial expression, every nervous gesture, every moment of their obvious guilt. The silence spoke louder than any denial could have. It was the sound of 2 careers ending, 2 reputations dying, 2 conspiracies collapsing under the weight of their own arrogance. Legal experts compared the Scheme 35 conspiracy to the Saturday Night Massacre, noting that this plot was far more comprehensive and dangerous to democratic institutions. While Nixon had fired specific prosecutors, Bondi and Patel had planned to reconstruct the entire justice system around political loyalty rather than rule of law. The scope of their ambition made their betrayal even more shocking to constitutional scholars. International reactions were swift and concerned. Allied intelligence services quietly began reviewing their cooperation agreements with U.S. law enforcement. worried about sharing sensitive information with an agency that might be compromised by political considerations. Democratic allies expressed relief that the plot had been exposed before implementation, while authoritarian regimes likely studied the recordings for insights into undermining their own justice systems. 6 months later, both faced federal charges. Bondi was indicted on conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. Patel faced additional charges related to abuse of classified information and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Their co-conspirators, revealed through the investigation, triggered by Whitehouse's bombshell, included several Trump campaign officials and at least 3 sitting Republican congressmen. The trials became must-see television, featuring the same recordings that had destroyed their nominations played in federal court as evidence of criminal intent. Bondi's defense that she was merely engaging in political discussion fell flat when prosecutors played recordings of her detailing specific illegal activities. Patel's claim that he was just brainstorming proved equally unconvincing when confronted with his detailed operational plans. Both were ultimately convicted and sentenced to federal prison. Bondi received 18 months for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Patel got 36 months for his more extensive role in planning the operation and his abuse of classified information. The sentences sent a clear message that attempting to weaponize the justice system carried serious consequences, regardless of political affiliation or previous service. Senator Whitehouse, meanwhile, became a national hero to defenders of democratic institutions. His methodical investigation and dramatic revelation earned him profiles in major magazines and speaking invitations at law schools across the country. The Rhode Island senator had proven that one person with evidence and courage could still hold powerful conspirators accountable in American democracy. The broader impact of the Scheme 35 exposure extended far beyond 2 ruined careers. Congress passed new laws requiring Senate confirmation of more DOJ positions, making it harder for future administrations to install political loyalists in career positions. Professional organizations strengthened ethics rules around political activities by prosecutors and law enforcement officials. Law schools began teaching the Bondi-Patel case as an example of how not to transition from private practice to public service. Trump's remaining presidential campaign never recovered from the Scheme 35 revelations. Voters who might have forgiven his other controversies couldn't overlook evidence that he'd planned to transform law enforcement into his personal political weapon. The recordings of his nominees discussing specific enemies lists reminded too many Americans of authoritarian regimes they'd hoped never to see in their own country. Years later, political scientists would mark the Scheme 35 exposure as a crucial moment when American democratic institutions proved they could still defend themselves against internal threats. The 43 seconds of silence that ended 2 careers became a symbol of accountability triumphing over conspiracy, truth defeating corruption, and one senator's courage protecting constitutional governance. Bondi and Patel, once destined for the highest levels of American law enforcement, instead became cautionary tales taught in ethics classes and constitutional law courses. Their recordings served as evidence that the founders' fears about concentrated power remained relevant centuries later, and that eternal vigilance truly was the price of liberty. The Justice Department, meanwhile, implemented new protocols to prevent future Scheme 35 scenarios. Career prosecutors gained additional protections against political removal. FBI agents received strengthened whistleblower protections for reporting political interference. The institution they'd planned to corrupt instead became stronger and more resistant to future political manipulation. Sometimes the strongest weapon against conspiracy isn't a badge or a subpoena. It's truth, recorded and revealed at exactly the right moment. What happens when conspirators who built power on secrecy are undone by their own word? If justice institutions can't survive transparency, were they ever really just? 43 seconds of silence answered those questions definitively, proving that in America, even the most powerful conspirators eventually face consequences for betraying their oaths to the Constitution they swore to defend.